Let's get right into it. Number 10. The doppelganger in the brain. You're walking down a dark hallway late at night, and suddenly you see yourself standing at the other end. Not your reflection, an exact copy of you just standing there. For centuries, people believed seeing your double, or doppelganger, meant death was coming to collect. Turns out, they weren't entirely wrong about the double part, just the death omen thing. Scientists recently discovered something wild in our brains called the temporal parietal junction. When this area gets messed with, either by illness, extreme stress, or scientists poking it with tiny electrodes, people start seeing their own ghost. Back in 2006, a 22-year-old student was having her brain mapped for epilepsy treatment. The doctors stimulated her temporal parietal junction, and suddenly she felt someone behind her. When she sat up, she felt this presence sit up too. When she hugged her knees, she felt this ghost copy doing the same thing. It was like having the world's creepiest mirror following her around. This exact same experience has been reported throughout history. Ancient Romans, medieval peasants, Victorian ladies, they all described seeing their doubles in exactly the same way. They just didn't know it was their brain playing a very specific trick on them. Number 9. The hidden world of fairies. Those stories about tiny magical people living in the woods might have been inspired by something very real. Around 50,000 years ago, our ancestors shared the world with different types of humans, including some really tiny ones, Homo floresiensis, or as scientists nicknamed them, the hobbits. These people were only about 3.5 feet tall, with brains about a third the size of ours, but they were smart enough to make tools and hunt. They lived on an island in Indonesia until as recently as 12,000 years ago, meaning their memory could have easily entered the stories of modern humans who encountered them. Imagine wandering through the forest as a regular-sized human. You spot a small group of people about half your size who quickly and elusively disappear into the trees or hidden places. This sounds like the basis for nearly every fairy tale ever written. And these hobbits didn't just live in Indonesia. Scientists have found evidence of other small human species across the globe. It's no coincidence that many of the places they lived also have legends about little people. Ireland has its leprechauns. Hawaii has the menahoon. All these cultures tell stories about small, clever people who disappeared, leaving nothing but bones and stories behind. Number 8. The dragon's poisonous breath. In ancient times, miners would sometimes find caves filled with gold and gems, but when they went inside to grab the treasure, they would drop dead. No wounds, no marks, just dead. They blamed it on a dragon's poisonous breath guarding its hoard. The reality is just as deadly. Caves, especially geologically active ones, often fill up with pockets of carbon dioxide. This gas is invisible, has no smell, and is heavier than air, so it pools at the bottom of caves like an invisible lake of death. When miners would descend into these caves, they would literally be walking into a pool of suffocating gas. One deep breath, and they would collapse without a sound. To anyone watching from the entrance, it would look like they were struck down by an unseen force. Some of these caves even breathe. Changes in atmospheric pressure can cause the gas to flow out of the cave entrance like a dragon exhaling. The ancient Greeks called these places Charoneia, or doorways to hell. One in Turkey is still called the Cave of Dogs, because any animal shorter than a human's knees will die walking into the knee-high layer of carbon dioxide, while taller humans walk through it completely unharmed. Number 7. The sky god's fiery chariots. You're an ancient person, outside your hut on a clear night. Suddenly, the sky lights up with a massive streak of fire. With no understanding of astronomy, you might think it was a god and his flaming chariot. Our ancestors weren't just making stuff up. Ancient texts from all over the world describe these sky gods riding in blazing vehicles. The Hindu Vedas have Surya riding his 7-horse chariot of fire. The Greeks had Apollo doing basically the same thing. Even the Bible has Elijah being whisked away to heaven in a chariot of fire. Scientists are now certain that ancient people were describing comets and meteors. In a world with zero light pollution, a massive fireball streaking across the sky, trailing sparks and maybe breaking into pieces, would be an unforgettable, terrifying spectacle. From that perspective, a cosmic being joyriding through the stars is a pretty good explanation. Some of these weren't just shooting stars. Scientists found evidence of a massive meteor airburst over the Middle East around 3,700 years ago, powerful enough to destroy cities like Tal el-Hammam, a candidate for the biblical Sodom. A giant flaming chariot showing up and destroying everything suddenly starts to sound pretty reasonable. Number 6. The Berserkers battle Trance. For years, people thought Viking berserkers were just myths, stories about warriors who'd strip down, bite their shields, and fight like they were possessed. But scientists now know these warriors were very real, and their supernatural rage has a biological explanation. These warriors would work themselves into a battle trance, a psychological state where non-essential functions shut down. Pain, fear, and rational thought would all disappear. Today, we call this phenomenon hysterical strength, like when a mother lifts a car to save her child. The Berserkers figured out how to trigger this on demand. They likely used a combination of things. First, intense rituals like chanting, drumming, and biting their shields to flood their bodies with adrenaline. Some historians also believe they used hallucinogenic substances, like certain mushrooms, to feel invincible before a battle. Mix that with adrenaline, and you get a warrior who feels no pain and believes he's part animal, part god. After the battle trance wore off, these warriors would crash hard, often feeling weak and exhausted for days. This cycle of extreme rage followed by a complete collapse matches the descriptions in the ancient Norse sagas perfectly. Viking berserkers weren't magical. They were masters of their own psychology, turning themselves into walking disaster zones. Number 5. The Midas touches Golden River. King Midas, who turned everything he touched into gold. It's one of the most famous myths, but it wasn't just a fairy tale. Scientists and archaeologists have discovered that the myth was likely born from a very real and very golden river that ran right through King Midas's kingdom. The river is called the Pactolus. In ancient times, it was loaded with electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver that washed down from the mountains. The people of Lydia, Midas's kingdom, were the first to figure out how to extract this gold on an industrial scale. They would use sheep fleeces, laying them in the river to trap the gold flakes, a practice that likely inspired the myth of Jason and the Golden Fleece. Imagine being a traveler 3,000 years ago. You arrive in King Midas's kingdom and see people literally pulling gold from the river. You see the king with golden cups, golden plates, golden everything. Of course you'd think the guy had some kind of magic touch. Midas wasn't turning things into gold with his fingers. He just happened to control the ancient world's equivalent of Fort Knox. Archaeologists have found ancient gold processing sites all along the river, and evidence of peak gold production lines up perfectly with when historians believe the real King Midas ruled. Number 4. The demon's neurological possession. Imagine living in medieval times, and your neighbor's daughter suddenly starts speaking in strange voices, thrashing around uncontrollably, and saying things that would make a sailor blush. Back then, there was only one explanation: demonic possession. But those ancient people were just trying to explain something they couldn't understand. Scientists have found that many historical cases of demonic possession match the symptoms of a terrifying condition called autoimmune encephalitis. It's when your own immune system gets confused and starts attacking your brain. The symptoms are straight out of a horror movie: sudden personality changes, hallucinations, speaking in garbled or different voices, and violent, uncontrollable movements. It can happen to anyone, at any age. One day you're fine, the next your brain is under siege from its own body. Some victims of this condition have even been reported to speak languages they've never formally learned. Scientists believe the brain in its haywire state can access deeply buried memories of languages a person may have only heard passively. So when a medieval priest reported a person speaking ancient Hebrew during an exorcism, they might have been witnessing a brain randomly pulling up linguistic data. Turns out, the demons were hiding in our own immune system all along. Number 3. The Troll's Stone Curse. Ancient Norse stories about trolls turning to stone at sunrise weren't just fairy tales to scare children. They were likely inspired by a very real geological feature that terrified ancient sailors and travelers. Scientists studying coastal rock formations in Scandinavia, called sea stacks, believe they are the origin of the myth. These pillars form when softer rock is eroded away by wind and waves, leaving behind harder stone spires that often look strangely humanoid, frozen mid-step. The myth likely came from the way these trolls would appear. Imagine being a Viking, sailing along a misty coast at dawn. As the fog begins to clear with the rising sun, these massive, man-shaped figures slowly emerge from the mist. It would be easy to believe these were night creatures caught by the morning light and turned to stone. The science of erosion, particularly frost wedging, is more active during the temperature swings that happen at dawn and dusk. The changing light and fog would have made these formations seem to appear and disappear, reinforcing the idea that they were living creatures with a strict curfew. So next time you see a weird-looking rock formation, remember you might be looking at a stone troll that scared your ancestors. Number 2. The Scrying Pool's Gaseous Visions. You're an ancient Greek wanting to know your future. You travel to the most famous oracle in the world, at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. You watch as the priestess, the Pythia, stares into a sacred spring. Suddenly, she starts speaking in riddles, seeing visions and spouting prophecies. For centuries, people assumed these oracles were either faking it or just high on something. According to modern science, they were absolutely right about the second part. The Pythia was getting high on geology. Researchers discovered that the temple at Delphi was built directly over the intersection of two geologic fault lines. These faults leaked ethylene gas, an intoxicant that in low doses produces a trance-like state and euphoric visions. The gas would bubble up through the ground and dissolve in the water of the sacred spring the Pythia used. She wasn't a scam artist. She was literally breathing in hallucinogenic fumes from the earth. The concentration was just right to cause hallucinations, without being lethal. Scientists tested the rock formations around Delphi and found traces of ethylene and other psychoactive gases, confirming that the ancient Greeks had unintentionally built their most sacred site on top of a natural gas leak. Number 1. The Draugr's Arctic Grave. Imagine digging in the frozen ground and finding a 1,000-year-old corpse that looks like it could wake up and start a conversation. You've just stumbled across what inspired the Norse myth of the Draugr, the undead. According to the myths, Draugr were super strong undead warriors who would viciously guard their tombs. If you were a Viking who discovered one of these incredibly preserved bodies, you'd probably run home screaming about the walking dead. Scientists now understand exactly why they believed this. The bodies were found in peat bogs. Peat bogs are nature's refrigerators. They are cold, highly acidic, and have almost no oxygen. This environment stops the normal process of decomposition. Instead, bodies are preserved, with skin turning dark and leathery, but remaining intact. They still have their hair, their fingernails, even their facial expressions. To a Viking, finding what looks like a sleeping warrior who died centuries ago would be terrifying enough, but it gets worse. As gases from the slow, anaerobic decay build up inside the corpse, a shift in pressure could cause the body to move. These preserved bodies could suddenly sit up, make groaning sounds as gas escaped, and even bleed a dark fluid if punctured. You're a Viking, you disturb a tomb, and the body inside sits up and groans. You're not sticking around to check for a pulse. You're running for your life, convinced you've just met a Draugr. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.